The country in the Hunger Games is called Panem, and the very first time you hear that name, the author is already telling you the whole dark secret of the story. You just need to speak Latin to catch it, because Panem is Latin. It means bread, and it's pulled from one of the most cynical phrases the ancient world ever produced: Panem et circenses, bread and circuses. It was the strategy a dying empire used to control its people. Keep them fed just enough, keep them entertained just enough, and they'll never notice you've taken everything else. Give the masses bread and games, and they won't revolt. The name of the entire nation is a Roman confession, and once you see that, you cannot unsee what the Hunger Games actually is. Because this isn't a made-up dystopia. Suzanne Collins built Panem, almost brick for brick, out of ancient Rome, and she left the fingerprints everywhere, hidden in plain sight, waiting for you to notice. This is real roots, the real history behind the stories you love. Let me show you the Rome buried inside the Hunger Games. Start with that phrase, because it's the key to everything. Bread and circuses comes from a Roman poet named Juvenal, writing almost 2,000 years ago, and he meant it as an insult to his own society. He was describing how the Roman people had changed. Once, in the days of the Republic, Roman citizens had cared about self-government. They voted, they argued, they took part in running the state. But under the emperors, Juvenal sneered, the people had given all of that up. They'd traded their freedom and their voice for two things: free grain and free entertainment. Bread and circuses. As long as the emperor kept their bellies full and put on a good show, they didn't care that they'd stopped being free. That is the exact machinery of Panem. The capital keeps the districts alive, barely, and it puts on the ultimate show, and it uses that show to keep an entire population too frightened and too distracted to rise up. Collins didn't just borrow a Roman phrase for a place name, she built her whole system of control out of the idea behind it. The Hunger Games is Juvenal's insult turned into a country, and that show, the games themselves, that's the Colosseum. This is the parallel you feel even if you never learn the history. In the capital, tributes are taken from their homes, thrown into a massive arena, and forced to fight each other to the death, while the privileged citizens watch it as entertainment, place bets, pick favorites, and cheer. That is Roman gladiatorial combat, almost exactly. The Romans took captives, slaves, and prisoners of war, threw them into an arena, and made them kill each other for the roar of a crowd. The Colosseum could hold 50,000 spectators screaming for blood, and the emperor sat above it all, deciding who lived and who died with the turn of a hand. And the specific details line up in ways that are genuinely unsettling. In the Hunger Games, the tributes aren't just thrown in to fight. First, they're paraded, dressed up, given stylists, made into celebrities, interviewed, made to seem glamorous right before they're sent to die. The Romans did the same thing. Successful gladiators became famous, their faces painted on walls, their names known across the city, sponsors backing them, fans adoring them, even as everyone understood they existed to bleed in the sand. The capital audience picks favorites and sends them gifts in the arena. Wealthy Romans sponsored their favorite fighters. The arena in the books is engineered with traps, fire, mutated beasts, and shifting terrain to make the killing more entertaining. The Romans flooded the Colosseum to stage mock naval battles, released exotic animals, lions, elephants, bears shipped from across the empire, and built trapdoors and lifts to make death arrive from nowhere. The game makers, who reshaped the arena to force the tributes together and keep the crowd entertained, are the Roman editores, the men who financed and designed the spectacles to win the public's love. Even the idea that the whole grim show is a political tool, that it exists to remind the districts who's in charge, is Roman to the core. Rome's games were propaganda, proof of the emperor's power, generosity, and total control over life and death. Swap the emperor for President Snow, and you're watching the same event across 2,000 years. The Hunger Games didn't invent the idea of turning human death into a national sport. Rome perfected it first, and Collins simply gave it back to us. But here's where it goes from cool parallel to she's practically daring you to notice. Because Collins didn't stop at the concept. She named the villains after Romans. Look at who runs the capital. The president, The cold, ruthless man at the top of this whole machine is named Coriolanus Snow. And the real Coriolanus is a perfect, deliberate choice. Gaius Marcius Coriolanus was a figure from the early days of Rome, a brilliant general and a proud patrician who genuinely despised the common people. When Rome's poor were starving and asking for grain, the real Coriolanus reportedly argued they should only get it if they gave up the political rights they'd won. That the people should be starved back into submission. A leader who saw hunger as a tool to control the masses. Now think about what President Snow does to the districts. Keeps them on the edge of starvation, deliberately, because a hungry population is an obedient one. Collins didn't pick the name Coriolanus by accident. She picked the ancient Roman who thought exactly like her villain. The man who runs Panem is named after a man who really did believe you rule people through their empty stomachs. And the pattern holds all the way down. The man who hosts the games, the smiling talk show face who makes child murder feel like a celebrity gala, is named Caesar. As in Julius Caesar, the name so synonymous with Roman power that it literally became the word for emperor, echoing down through the centuries as Kaiser and Tsar. The men who designed the arena, the head game makers, are named Seneca and Plutarch. Seneca, a real Roman philosopher who advised and tried to restrain the mad Emperor Nero. A real ancient writer whose biographies of great men shaped how the whole world remembers Rome. The stylists, the elites, the whole decadent ruling class, Cinna, Portia, all of it, carry Roman names, and here's the detail that proves it's deliberate. The people from the districts, the oppressed, the rebels, Katniss, Gale, Peta, Rue, they don't have Roman names. They have names from nature, or plain names, anything but Rome. Collins split her entire cast down the middle. Roman names for the oppressors, everything else for the oppressed. The naming isn't decoration. It's a map of who's Rome and who's the conquered. And once you know that, the geography clicks into place too. Panem is one gleaming, wealthy, hedonistic city, the capital, surrounded by 12 poor districts that do all the actual work. The districts mine the coal, catch the fish, grow the grain, make the goods, and send it all inward to a capital that produces nothing but consumes everything and lives in obscene luxury off their labor. That is the structure of the Roman Empire. One central city, Rome, grown impossibly rich, ringed by provinces that were worked, taxed, and drained to feed the center. The provinces bled so the city could feast. Collins took the shape of an empire, the exploiting core and the exploited edge, and made it the map of Panem. Now Collins pulled from more than just Rome, and this is the part that adds a second, older layer underneath. Because think about how the tributes are actually chosen. Every year, each district is forced to hand over its own children, a boy and a girl, to be sent to the capital, and almost certainly killed. A recurring tribute of young people, demanded by a distant power, sent off to die for its entertainment. That's not only Roman, that's Greek. It's the myth of Theseus and the Minotaur, where the city of Athens was forced to send a tribute of its young men and women to Crete, every year, to be fed to a monster in a labyrinth. Until one of them, Theseus, volunteered, went in, and killed the monster to end the whole cruel system. Collins has said it outright. Katniss is a modern Theseus. The girl who volunteers in her sister's place, walks into the labyrinth of the arena, and by surviving it, becomes the spark that brings the whole system down. The reaping is the tribute to the Minotaur. Katniss is the hero who ends it. So put the whole picture together. Because this is what Collins actually did. She took the darkest lesson of the Roman Empire, that you can keep a whole people enslaved as long as you feed them and entertain them. Bread and circuses. And she wrapped it around the horror of the gladiator arena, staffed it with villains named after real Romans, laid it over the exploitation map of a real empire, and threaded an even older Greek myth of human sacrifice through the middle of it. The Hunger Games feels like an invented future. It's almost entirely an assembled past. And that's exactly why it hits as hard as it does, and why Collins built it this way on purpose. Because her real target was never some far-off fictional dystopia. Bread and circuses wasn't just a Roman problem. Juvenal was warning that any society can be pacified this way, kept comfortable, kept entertained, kept distracted, until it forgets to notice what's being done to it, and what freedoms it's quietly handed over. Collins reached back 2,000 years, pulled out Rome's ugliest trick, The Hunger Games isn't really a warning about the future. It's Rome telling you something about right now. So the arena and the tributes and the Capitol feel like science fiction. But the bread and circumstances were real, and the Romans really used them. The gladiators dying for a cheering crowd were real. The provinces bled dry to feed one glittering city were real. The tyrants whose names Collins borrowed were real men. She didn't imagine the nightmare of Panem. She excavated it. Out of Rome, out of Athens, out of the oldest warnings we have about what power does to people. And she dressed it up just enough that we'd watch it as entertainment. Which, if you think about it, is the most Roman move of all. This has been Real Roots, the real history behind the stories you love. And next time, I want to look at another world you thought was pure fantasy. And the real buried history its creator built it out of.